It was September 12, 1942 on Guadalcanal, and a contingent of 800 U.S. Marines found themselves in a strategically precarious situation that appeared to spell their doom. Lieutenant Colonel Red Mike Edson had received credible intelligence indicating that approximately 2,500 Japanese soldiers were maneuvering through the dense jungle with the intention of encircling his forces stationed on the ridge south of Henderson Field. Standard military doctrine dictated a clear course of action. When facing a 3-to-1 numerical disadvantage and the threat of encirclement, retreat to more defensible terrain, request reinforcements, and regroup. Yet Edson, surveying his weary Marines, depleted ammunition reserves, and the lack of viable escape routes, made a daring choice that flew in the face of conventional military wisdom. He commanded his men to consolidate their defensive perimeter, essentially inviting the enemy to draw closer and completely surround them. As the humid darkness of the Pacific jungle descended, Japanese troops advanced from 3 directions, fully expecting to crush the Americans in a swift and decisive night assault. However, what transpired that night would challenge established notions of defensive warfare and transform a seemingly hopeless predicament into an astonishingly one-sided victory for the Marine Corps. As night enveloped the ridge on September 13th, the oppressive humidity of Guadalcanal's jungle seemed to suffocate the Marines. Lieutenant Colonel Merritt Edson, a man who had already calculated the odds of survival, moved deliberately through his defensive positions. The numbers were stark: 800 Marines against a confirmed 2,500 Japanese soldiers advancing through the jungle below. While the statistics painted a grim picture, Edson knew from experience that numbers rarely told the whole story. The ridge itself was hardly imposing, a modest elevation of coral and volcanic rock, rising approximately 60 feet above the surrounding jungle and extending roughly 1,000 yards from north to south. To military strategists in Washington studying maps, it likely appeared insignificant. However, to the Marines entrenched along its slopes, it represented the critical boundary between American control of Henderson Field and potential catastrophe in the Pacific Theater. The vital airstrip lay a mere 800 yards to the north, close enough for the Marines to hear the faint hum of aircraft engines igniting in the pre-dawn hours. Edson had meticulously positioned his forces with the precision of a chess master playing for the highest stakes. The 1st Raider Battalion occupied the northern section of the ridge, closest to Henderson Field, while the 1st Parachute Battalion defended the southern approaches. Their overlapping fields of fire provided comprehensive coverage of the jungle approaches. Nevertheless, Edson understood that firepower alone would not guarantee their survival. The Japanese had repeatedly demonstrated their willingness to absorb heavy casualties to achieve their objectives, and Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi was leading a force 3 times the size of Edson's through the darkness. The Marines had endured over a month of combat on Guadalcanal, and the jungle had imparted lessons that no training manual could replicate. The stifling humidity turned every piece of metal into a searing brand during the day and coated it with condensation at night. Canvas rotted rapidly, and food spoiled within days. The men were losing precious weight and succumbing to tropical diseases that sapped their strength. However, they had also learned to exploit the jungle's unique acoustics, listening intently for the subtle sounds that betrayed enemy movement through the dense undergrowth. As Edson inspected his lines, he observed Gunnery Sergeant John Basilone adjusting the traverse mechanism on his Browning M1917 machine gun. This water-cooled weapon, a relic from the previous war, weighed 41 pounds without its tripod, but possessed a sustained rate of fire capable of tearing through human flesh at ranges of up to 1,500 yards. Basilone had already distinguished himself in previous engagements, displaying the unwavering competence under fire that separated seasoned Marines from newly arrived replacements. "How's your ammunition situation, Gunny?" Edson inquired, crouching near the machine gun emplacement. "Enough to make them think twice about coming up this hill, Colonel," Basilone replied, with the quiet confidence that Edson had come to rely on. "Though I wouldn't mind having a few more belts if the Japanese decide to get serious about this." Private First Class Robert Mard, armed with his Springfield rifle, bayonet fixed, was dug in 20 yards to Basilone's left. The young Marine had arrived on Guadalcanal a mere 3 weeks prior, still bearing the relatively innocent look of stateside training camps. But the jungle was already transforming him. His uniform hung loosely on his frame, and his eyes possessed the heightened alertness that came from knowing that death could strike without warning from any direction. According to intelligence reports and captured documents, the Japanese strategy hinged on speed and shock. Kawaguchi's forces had been navigating the jungle for 3 days, following trails that only the most experienced guides could traverse in daylight. Their plan called for a coordinated night assault from 3 directions, designed to overwhelm the American positions through sheer numbers and the psychological impact of fighting in complete darkness. However, the Japanese had not accounted for the defensive preparations that Edson had implemented over the preceding week. Every approach to the ridge had been meticulously studied, measured, and pre-registered for artillery fire. The Marines had cleared fields of fire through the jungle undergrowth, creating killing zones that would channel attacking forces into predetermined corridors. Wire obstacles, though limited by supply shortages, had been strategically positioned to slow and funnel enemy troops into the most effective engagement ranges. Moreover, the Marines possessed advantages that would not be reflected in any intelligence report that Kawaguchi might have received. Their training emphasized individual initiative and adaptability, qualities that proved invaluable in the chaos of night combat. In contrast to their Japanese counterparts, who relied heavily on coordinated group tactics, American Marines were trained to fight effectively as individuals when larger formations disintegrated under fire. Please stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. As the battle intensified, the Marines' resolve was tested to its limits. Their mental fortitude strained under the relentless onslaught. The weapons, pushed to their operational zenith, occasionally succumbed to the rigors of constant firing, their metallic hearts faltering amidst the chaos of combat. As the veil of night descended further, the symphony of the jungle underwent a profound transformation. The customary ensemble of insects and nocturnal creatures gradually yielded to an eerie quietude, a phenomenon recognized by every seasoned Marine as the harbinger of imminent engagement. Lurking in the obscurity beneath the ridge, a multitude of Japanese soldiers stealthily maneuvered into position, their collective presence generating a disturbance that even the denizens of the jungle could detect. Edson embarked on his concluding circuit of the defensive perimeter, engaging in hushed conversations with squad leaders and meticulously verifying ammunition reserves. The Marines possessed approximately 200 rounds per rifleman, augmented by grenades, mortars, and the steadfast machine guns that would constitute the linchpin of their defense. While not an overabundance, it sufficed for men who had mastered the art of making each shot count, their proficiency honed through rigorous training and battlefield experience. The colonel's radio crackled to life, relaying reports from observation posts strategically positioned throughout the jungle. Japanese forces had been sighted advancing along 3 distinct axes, corroborating intelligence estimates of a multifaceted assault. The enemy had drawn so near that individual voices could occasionally be discerned through the dense undergrowth, uttering the clipped syllables of Japanese military commands. At 11:45 p.m., the initial salvo of Japanese mortar rounds began to descend upon the ridge. The explosions were sporadic and lacked coordination, suggesting that Kawaguchi's forces were still in the process of deploying and calibrating their indirect fire weaponry. However, the shelling served its intended psychological purpose, signaling to the Marines that the battle they had anticipated was finally about to commence. Edson assumed his station at the command post, a shallow depression fortified by sandbags and situated at the apex of the ridge. From this strategic vantage point, he could survey the entirety of his defensive line and maintain radio contact with Henderson Field, the vital airstrip that represented a lifeline to the embattled Marines. The airstrip's artillery batteries stood poised to provide fire support, their guns primed and trained on predetermined target coordinates. The jungle dissolved into pandemonium as the vanguard of Japanese infantry emerged from the tree line, their battle cries reverberating across the ridge as they surged toward the Marine positions. The true crucible was at hand. The first echelon of Japanese infantry erupted from the jungle's edge like a human avalanche, their voices raised in the time-honored Banzai war cry that had instilled fear in Allied forces throughout the Pacific theater. However, as they charged up the slopes of the ridge, they encountered an unforeseen obstacle that Major General Kawaguchi had not factored into his tactical calculations. The Marines did not falter. They did not yield ground. Instead, they unleashed a torrent of fire with disciplined precision, transforming the hillside into a zone of carnage. Bassilone's machine gun commenced its deadly work at a range of 800 yards. The heavy slugs from the Browning tore through the advancing Japanese ranks like a scythe through a field of wheat. The weapon's water-cooled barrel facilitated sustained fire that bolt-action rifles simply could not match, and Bassilone had strategically positioned his gun to enfilade the primary avenue of approach. Each burst discharged 5 to 7 rounds downrange in less than 2 seconds, and at this distance, every round that found its mark proved lethal. Kawaguchi's assault had been conceived according to traditional infantry doctrine, which emphasized speed and shock action. His forces were expected to rapidly close the distance to American positions, leveraging darkness and numerical superiority to offset their limited firepower. However, the ridge's terrain conspired against them in ways that no amount of pre-battle reconnaissance could have revealed. The Marines had meticulously studied every approach, every fold in the ground, every piece of cover that an attacking force might exploit. Private Mard peered down the sights of his Springfield rifle and squeezed the trigger, observing as a Japanese soldier stumbled and collapsed 50 yards downslope from his position. The young Marine, smoothly manipulated the bolt action, ejecting the spent cartridge, and chambering a fresh round with the mechanical proficiency that months of rigorous training had ingrained into his muscle memory. Around him, the distinctive crack of American rifles formed a steady percussion that punctuated the deeper roar of the machine guns. Kawaguchi had fundamentally misconstrued the essence of American defensive doctrine. Japanese military philosophy emphasized the spiritual ascendancy of the attack, the conviction that resolute infantry could overcome any impediment through sheer force of will. American doctrine, conversely, prioritized maximizing firepower and establishing interlocking fields of fire that would decimate attacking forces before they could close to effective range. The Marines had transformed the ridge into a fortress meticulously designed to exploit every advantage that modern weaponry could offer. The Japanese forces advancing up the southern approaches were met with their initial devastating surprise when American mortar rounds began to rain down among their ranks. The Marines had pre-plotted every likely avenue of approach, measuring distances and calculating firing solutions during daylight hours when they could operate without fear of enemy observation. Now, under the cloak of darkness, those calculations yielded dividends as high explosive shells detonated with lethal precision among the densely packed Japanese infantry. Corporal Watanabe led his squad through the dense undergrowth, desperately seeking cover, as American bullets whizzed overhead and mortar fragments whistled through the jungle canopy. The veteran, non-commissioned officer had participated in successful night assaults across the Pacific. But this was different. The American fire was too accurate, too sustained, too well coordinated to be the product of panicked defenders firing wildly into the darkness. These Marines were shooting with purpose, and Japanese soldiers were dying faster than they could advance. The tactical reality that Kawaguchi was only beginning to grasp became starkly apparent as his second wave emerged from the jungle to find the ground ahead of them strewn with the bodies of their comrades. The Marines had not only repelled the initial assault, but had done so with such devastating efficiency that the attacking forces were already losing cohesion. Japanese squad and platoon leaders, the experienced non-commissioned officers who held their units together in combat, were being systematically eliminated by American marksmen who had learned to identify targets of opportunity in the muzzle flashes and movement patterns of the attacking infantry. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Edson meticulously observed the unfolding combat from his command center, receiving updates from his officers and directing artillery strikes from Henderson Field. It was evident to the colonel that this engagement was more than a simple probing attack. Kawaguchi had committed substantial forces to this offensive, indicating the ridge's critical importance to the enemy. However, Edson also recognized that the Japanese were repeating fundamental tactical errors that his Marines were well prepared to exploit with their training and equipment, turning the attackers' persistence into a disadvantage. The American artillery units at Henderson Field, having pre-registered targets around the ridge, unleashed a barrage of devastating fire. The 150 mm howitzers delivered high explosive rounds with remarkable accuracy, guided by forward observers maintaining constant communication with the gun crews since the initial bombardment. Each shell created a deadly fragmentation zone, capable of disabling enemy infantry across a 40-yard radius, with the guns firing at an impressive rate of 4 rounds per minute, turning the area into a gauntlet for the advancing Japanese soldiers. Japanese tactics emphasized infiltration and close-quarters combat, but the terrain surrounding the ridge provided scant cover for large formations. The Marines had established clear fields of fire extending 300 yards in all directions, creating lethal kill zones where attacking forces were exposed to concentrated fire from multiple fortified positions. Even under the cover of darkness, the muzzle flashes from Japanese weapons revealed their locations to the American gunners, who were expertly trained to engage targets based on sound and visual signatures, ensuring a constant and accurate response. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. The third wave of the Japanese assault encountered an even more refined defense as Edson implemented tactics that would later become standard procedure for American forces throughout the Pacific theater. Instead of merely holding fixed positions, Marine squads initiated limited counterattacks designed to disrupt Japanese formations before they could organize coordinated assaults. These small unit actions, often led by seasoned, non-commissioned officers like Basilone, effectively prevented the enemy from establishing effective firing positions within range of the ridge. Kawaguchi's forces found themselves trapped in a tactical predicament for which their training had not prepared them. The Americans were not behaving as predicted by Japanese intelligence based on prior engagements. Instead of retreating under pressure or collapsing when subjected to determined assaults, the Marines fought with a professional competence that transformed every perceived Japanese advantage into a liability. The sustained rate of fire from American weapons proved decisive as the battle entered its second hour, giving them a significant edge. Japanese infantry, primarily armed with bolt-action rifles, were outgunned by Marines who possessed not only superior firepower, but also the tactical acumen to employ it effectively. The Browning machine guns, supported by mortars and artillery, created an interconnected web of destruction that no amount of individual bravery could overcome. By midnight, Kawaguchi's assault had completely lost momentum. His forces were scattered and disorganized across the jungle approaches to the ridge. The general now faced a critical decision that would determine the course of the battle. Either continue to commit his remaining forces to what had become a killing field, or concede that his initial strategy had failed and attempt to devise new tactics to counter an enemy who defied Japanese expectations of American combat prowess. An eerie silence descended upon the jungle as the fourth Japanese assault wave disintegrated into scattered groups of survivors, crawling back through the dense undergrowth. Kawaguchi had committed over 1,500 men to the attacks, and the ridge remained firmly in American hands. But the general was far from defeated. In the pre-dawn darkness of September 14th, he prepared to wager everything on a final, coordinated assault that would either shatter the Marine defense or annihilate what remained of his command, setting the stage for a climactic confrontation. Edson moved through his lines, assessing ammunition reserves and redeploying his forces to fill the gaps created by 4 hours of continuous combat. The Marines had performed admirably, but they were visibly showing the effects of sustained action. Private Mard had fired over 100 rounds from his Springfield rifle, more ammunition than many Marines expended in an entire month of training. His shoulder ached from the weapon's recoil, and his hands trembled slightly as he reloaded his 8-round clips by touch in the darkness, highlighting the physical toll of the battle. The colonel's primary concern was the dwindling ammunition supply for the machine guns. Bassilone's crew had fired nearly 3,000 rounds, replacing barrels twice to prevent overheating, despite the weapon's water-cooled design. The gunnery sergeant reported that he had approximately 500 rounds remaining, enough for another sustained engagement, but insufficient for a prolonged battle. Similar reports came from other machine gun positions along the ridge, each crew rationing their remaining ammunition while maintaining their assigned sectors of fire, underscoring the precariousness of their situation. Kawaguchi had learned from his previous failures, and his final assault reflected a more nuanced understanding of American defensive capabilities. Instead of launching mass frontal attacks that played to Marine strengths, he divided his remaining forces into smaller infiltration groups, tasked with penetrating the American perimeter and attacking from multiple directions simultaneously. The Japanese were prepared to sacrifice the psychological impact of banzai charges in favor of tactics that might prove more effective against disciplined defenders, marking a significant shift in strategy. The new Japanese approach became evident when Marine listening posts began reporting movement from sectors that had been quiet during the earlier assaults. Small groups of enemy soldiers were attempting to maneuver around the flanks of the American position, using ravines and dense vegetation to conceal their movements. These infiltrators carried light weapons and grenades, intending to get close enough to the Marine positions to neutralize key assets like machine guns and mortars through surprise attacks, posing a new and insidious threat to the defenders. Following initial surprise incursions, Colonel Edson strategically redeployed his reserve forces, drawn from behind the primary defense line, to directly engage and neutralize the infiltrating enemy combatants. These Marines, seasoned and proficient, possessed a proven aptitude for autonomous operation within compact units. Navigating the dense jungle terrain with the stealth of experienced hunters, they adeptly used their intimate knowledge of the land to intercept and confront the approaching Japanese forces, thwarting their advance toward the ridge. The ensuing combat was markedly different from the preceding assaults, characterized by intense, close-quarters engagements. Individual Marines found themselves in direct confrontation with Japanese soldiers, some of whom had penetrated as close as 30 yards from critical defensive emplacements. Private Mard, detecting movement in the dense undergrowth to his left, swiftly reacted to the sight of a Japanese soldier emerging with a primed grenade. His decisive rifle shot felled the enemy combatant, the grenade rolling harmlessly down the slope to detonate harmlessly amidst the trees below. Sergeant Bassilone's position became a focal point of intense enemy fire when a Japanese squad successfully advanced to within grenade-throwing range of his machine gun. Bassilone and his crew fiercely defended their sandbagged position, employing pistols and rifle butts in a desperate attempt to repel the enemy assault. One Japanese soldier managed to reach the machine gun itself, only to be immediately neutralized by Bassilone with a burst from his personal Thompson submachine gun, the fallen soldier's body collapsing onto the weapon's tripod. The sheer intensity of this close-quarters fighting introduced widespread disorder along the defensive perimeter. However, It simultaneously exposed a critical flaw in General Kawaguchi's revised strategy. By dispersing his forces into smaller infiltration units, the general had inadvertently sacrificed the critical mass and momentum necessary for successful breakthrough operations. Instead of concentrating his available strength against a single, vulnerable point in the American line, he had diffused his forces across multiple objectives. This allowed the Marines to systematically defeat each group in detail, nullifying the overall offensive. American artillery continued to exert a pivotal influence on the battle's outcome, now directed at targets identified by forward observers positioned perilously close to enemy emplacements. The proximity of friendly and enemy forces made these artillery missions exceedingly dangerous, demanding impeccable timing and precise calculations to prevent friendly fire incidents. Shell bursts briefly illuminated the jungle in hellish flashes, revealing Japanese soldiers desperately seeking refuge among the twisted roots and fallen trees. The tactical environment had evolved to one that favored American training and equipment. The Marines excelled in small unit actions that required individual initiative and adaptability. Their weapons were built for sustained fire and close-range accuracy. Most importantly, their doctrine emphasized aggressive counterattacks that prevented enemy forces from consolidating gains or establishing firing positions. As the first light of dawn approached, the nature of the battle shifted. Kawaguchi's infiltration tactics had failed to achieve a breakthrough, and daylight would expose his remaining forces to devastating fire from American positions that commanded excellent fields of observation. The general faced the prospect of continuing his attacks in broad daylight against defenders who had already proven their ability to inflict catastrophic casualties on his forces. The Japanese began withdrawing shortly after 5 in the morning, their movement covered by mortar fire that was poorly coordinated and largely ineffective. Marine observers watched through field glasses as scattered groups of enemy soldiers retreated through the jungle, leaving behind equipment and wounded comrades in their haste to escape the killing ground around the ridge. Edson ordered his forces to maintain their positions and avoid pursuit operations that might expose them to ambush or lead them into prepared enemy positions. The colonel understood that his primary mission was defensive, and he had achieved that mission with a tactical victory that exceeded all reasonable expectations. His 800 Marines had not only held their ground against overwhelming odds, but had virtually destroyed an enemy force 3 times their size. The aftermath of the battle revealed the true scale of the Japanese defeat. Reconnaissance patrols counted over 700 enemy bodies on the approaches to the ridge, with many more wounded soldiers evacuated during the retreat. American casualties numbered fewer than 50 killed and wounded, a ratio that would have seemed impossible to military analysts studying the preliminary force dispositions. Kawaguchi's failure at the ridge effectively ended Japanese offensive capabilities on Guadalcanal and marked the beginning of a strategic shift that would characterize the remainder of the Pacific War. The Marines had demonstrated that disciplined defenders with superior firepower could defeat numerically superior attackers, regardless of their reputation for fanatical courage. More importantly, they had shown that American forces could adapt their tactics to exploit enemy weaknesses while maximizing their own technological and training advantages. The ridge that would forever bear Edson's name had become the graveyard of Japanese hopes for victory. on Guadalcanal. And the 800 Marines who held it had proven that superior numbers meant nothing against superior preparation, training, and leadership. The first rays of dawn painted the jungle canopy in shades of gold and green as Edson surveyed the battlefield that stretched below the ridge. What he saw defied every prediction that staff officers had made about Japanese resilience and fighting capability. Bodies lay scattered across the approaches, in groupings that told the story of each failed assault, their positions marking the high watermark of what had been one of the most concentrated enemy offensives in the Pacific War. The silence that had settled over the ridge carried an almost supernatural quality, broken only by the distant calls of tropical birds resuming their morning routines. Private Mard emerged from his fighting position for the first time in 6 hours, his legs unsteady beneath him as circulation returned to limbs that had remained cramped in the same defensive posture throughout the night. The young Marine looked out across the killing field with the hollow-eyed stare of someone who had witnessed industrialized death on a scale that no training exercise could simulate. Japanese equipment lay abandoned among the bodies. Rifles with their distinctive long bayonets, light mortars that had never found their range, and canvas packs spilling personal effects across the jungle floor. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Under the thick canopy of Guadalcanal's jungle, Gunnery Sergeant Basilone meticulously cleaned his machine gun, diligently swabbing the barrel to eliminate the carbon residue left behind from firing nearly 4,000 rounds. Throughout the intense battle, the weapon had functioned flawlessly, its innovative water-cooled system preventing the overheating that would have rendered it useless during the most critical moments. However, the seasoned gunnery sergeant knew that the weapon's mechanical reliability was only part of the equation. The tactical skill to effectively employ it was equally crucial. He had demonstrated that American machine gun doctrine, when implemented with precision, could inflict devastating losses on attacking infantry formations. As Marine patrols began to move across the battlefield to gather intelligence and assess enemy casualties, the sheer magnitude of Japanese losses became starkly apparent. Colonel Kawaguchi had committed the equivalent of 3 full battalions to his assault on the ridge, a force of approximately 2,500 men, comprised of some of his most seasoned combat units. Of this formidable force, fewer than 800 remained capable of organized resistance, with many wounded or separated from their units during the chaotic retreat. What made this defeat particularly crushing for Japanese strategic planning was the caliber of the forces that had been decimated. These were not inexperienced recruits or second-rate garrison troops, but hardened veterans who had participated in successful campaigns throughout the Pacific theater. Many of Kawaguchi's soldiers had fought in the conquest of the Dutch East Indies and the Philippines, acquiring invaluable combat experience that Japanese planners considered essential for offensive operations against American forces. The loss of such experienced personnel represented a blow to Japanese military capability that extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation on Guadalcanal. Edson's tactical triumph reverberated through the highest echelons of military strategy on both sides of the Pacific conflict. For the Americans, the resolute defense of the ridge served as a powerful demonstration that Japanese forces were not invincible, that superior numbers and fanatical determination could be overcome through professional competence and the effective application of firepower. This pivotal lesson would shape American tactical doctrine for the remainder of the war, instilling confidence in commanders to trust in their training and equipment, even when facing seemingly insurmountable odds. The Japanese response to the defeat laid bare fundamental weaknesses in their strategic thinking that had been previously concealed by earlier victories against less prepared adversaries. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the implications of this pivotal battle. Don't miss the rest of the story. If you're enjoying this historical analysis, please give us a like and subscribe to our channel for more content like this. Also, please write a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. Kawaguchi's after-action reports attributed his failure to inadequate artillery support and insufficient time for reconnaissance. However, these explanations sidestepped the fundamental issue. Japanese infantry tactics had been designed for campaigns against opponents who lacked the firepower and tactical acumen of American Marine units. No amount of additional preparation could have compensated for these inherent doctrinal limitations. American intelligence officers who interrogated captured Japanese soldiers discovered that Kawaguchi's forces had been led to believe that they would encounter minimal resistance from demoralized American defenders, who would crumble under a determined assault. This profound misjudgment of Marine capabilities reflected broader Japanese misconceptions about American fighting prowess that would prove costly throughout the Pacific War. The fallacy that Western soldiers lacked the spiritual fortitude for sustained combat had been decisively disproven. The strategic ramifications of the battle extended beyond immediate military considerations, influencing the broader trajectory of the Pacific War. Henderson Field remained firmly in American hands, providing a vital base for air operations that would gradually cripple Japanese supply lines to their remaining forces on Guadalcanal. Deprived of the ability to reinforce or resupply their positions, Japanese commanders faced the daunting prospect of conducting a defensive campaign with inadequate resources against an enemy who controlled both the sea approaches and the airspace above the island. For the Marines who had fought on the ridge, the victory served as validation of training methods and tactical doctrines that many had questioned during their months of preparation in the United States. The emphasis on individual marksmanship, small unit tactics, and the aggressive use of supporting weapons had proven remarkably effective against an enemy renowned for military prowess. More importantly, they had demonstrated to themselves and to observers throughout the Pacific that American forces could not only match Japanese combat effectiveness, but could surpass it when properly led and equipped. The human cost of the victory, while relatively light by the standards of Pacific warfare, still represented irreplaceable losses for units that had no immediate prospect of receiving replacements. 43 Marines had been killed during the engagement, with another 97 wounded seriously enough to require medical evacuation. Each casualty represented years of training and combat experience that could not be easily replaced, underscoring the importance of tactical victories that achieved strategic objectives while minimizing friendly losses. Edson's personal leadership during the battle became a seminal case study in small unit command that would be analyzed and emulated throughout the Marine Corps for decades to come. His decision to allow Japanese forces to surround his position had seemed like tactical suicide to observers who lacked a full understanding of the defensive advantages that the ridge provided. By forcing the enemy to attack uphill against prepared positions, he had maximized the effectiveness of American firepower while neutralizing Japanese advantages in numbers and close combat proficiency. The ridge that would forever be known as Edson's Ridge represented more than just another tactical victory in the protracted struggle for control of the Pacific. It marked the beginning of a fundamental shift in the balance of military effectiveness that would characterize the remainder of the war against Japan. American forces had proven that superior training, equipment, and leadership could overcome any advantage in numbers or fighting spirit that their enemies might possess. The lessons learned in the jungles of Guadalcanal would resonate across every battlefield from the Solomon Islands to the shores of Japan itself, carried forward by Marines who had witnessed the birth of American tactical supremacy in the Pacific theater of operations. The radio communications flooding into Japanese command centers on the morning of September 14th presented a situation that Kawaguchi struggled to grasp. His brigade, initially composed of over 3,000 soldiers just days prior, had essentially ceased to function as a cohesive fighting force. Unit commanders, who remained in contact, reported casualty rates exceeding 60%, with many companies reduced to fewer than 20 effective combatants. The 35th Infantry Brigade, previously regarded as one of the most formidable units in the Imperial Japanese Army, had been decimated against the ridge in a single night of intense combat. The surviving soldiers straggled through the dense jungle in small, disorganized groups, many burdened with wounded comrades, which slowed their retreat and made them susceptible to American pursuit. Japanese military doctrine had historically overlooked the complexities of large-scale withdrawals, operating under the assumption that victory or death were the only acceptable outcomes for imperial forces. Now, Kawaguchi was confronted with the unprecedented and daunting task of evacuating the remnants of his command, while simultaneously trying to maintain enough organizational structure to prevent a complete and utter collapse. Captain Suzuki, one of Kawaguchi's few remaining company commanders, had observed the final, disastrous assault from a forward observation post that provided a clear and unobstructed view of the American defensive line. His report to brigade headquarters detailed Marine positions that maintained disciplined and effective fire, even as Japanese soldiers advanced to within 20 yards of their fortified fighting holes. Suzuki noted that the Americans never appeared to panic or lose their tactical cohesion, responding to each Japanese advance with coordinated and devastating counterfire that eliminated attackers with almost mechanical precision. Their unwavering resolve and synchronized actions painted a grim picture of an enemy that was both well-prepared and mentally resilient. American intelligence officers, diligently monitoring Japanese radio communications, detected the growing sense of desperation in enemy transmissions as unit commanders frantically attempted to account for their scattered and depleted forces. The intercepted messages revealed that Kawaguchi had lost all contact with over half of his subordinate units, many of which had been so completely annihilated that no survivors remained to report their fate. Those units that managed to maintain communication painted a consistent and grim picture of catastrophic losses and utter tactical failure. The repercussions of this defeat extended far beyond the immediate battlefield, significantly impacting Japanese strategic planning throughout the Solomon Islands campaign. High Command had initially designated Kawaguchi's brigade as the spearhead of a larger offensive aimed at recapturing Henderson Field and neutralizing American air power in the region. The failure of this assault compelled a fundamental re-evaluation of Japanese military capabilities and exposed the fact that American defensive strength had been dramatically underestimated by Tokyo's military planners. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We will be grateful for your like and subscription. Leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic. For the Marines positioned on the ridge, the magnitude of their resounding victory became increasingly apparent as patrols returned with detailed reports of enemy equipment and casualties strewn across several square miles of dense jungle. The sheer volume of abandoned Japanese war material vividly illustrated the story of an army in full disorganized retreat. Rifles carelessly discarded to expedite withdrawal, mortars left behind when their crews were killed or wounded in action, and personal equipment scattered along every trail, leading away from the immediate battlefield. Intelligence specialists meticulously catalogued the captured weapons and documents, constructing a comprehensive picture of Japanese tactical organization and equipment that would prove to be invaluable in future engagements throughout the Pacific Theater. Private Mard accompanied one of the reconnaissance patrols that ventured beyond the immediate perimeter to comprehensively assess the extent of Japanese losses. The scenes he witnessed during that patrol would remain indelibly etched into his memory for the remainder of his life. The lifeless bodies of enemy soldiers lay in positions that poignantly revealed the story of each failed assault, their equipment and weapons scattered in patterns that vividly indicated the intensity and effectiveness of American defensive fire. Many Japanese positions bore unmistakable evidence of direct hits from artillery or mortar rounds, with entire squads obliterated in single, devastating explosions that left behind craters surrounded by debris and human remains. Bass alone meticulously supervised the redistribution of ammunition recovered from Japanese sources, carefully examining captured rifles and machine guns to thoroughly assess their capabilities and potential battlefield applications. The Japanese weapons exhibited excellent craftsmanship and attention to detail, but revealed design philosophies that differed significantly from traditional American approaches. Whereas American weapons prioritized sustained fire and mechanical reliability under adverse conditions, Japanese designs seemed to prioritize accuracy and conservation of ammunition, reflecting fundamental differences in tactical doctrines and manufacturing capabilities. The strategic implications of the fierce battle resonated through both military hierarchies, as senior commanders on both sides desperately attempted to understand the full scope of what had transpired on the ridge. American generals viewed the outcome as a clear validation of training programs and tactical doctrines that had been meticulously developed during peacetime, but never before rigorously tested under actual combat conditions. The unwavering emphasis on small unit leadership, individual marksmanship, and the coordinated use of supporting weapons had proven to be devastatingly effective against an enemy widely renowned for its military competence and fighting prowess. Japanese military leaders faced the considerably more difficult and unenviable task of explaining how elite infantry units had been so decisively destroyed by a numerically inferior enemy, fighting from carefully prepared, and fortified positions. Traditional Japanese military thinking had long emphasized spiritual strength and aggressive, unrelenting tactics as the primary keys to achieving victory, concepts that had ultimately proven to be inadequate when confronted with the overwhelming firepower and defensive expertise of the American forces. The crushing defeat forced a painful and sobering recognition that technological superiority and professional training could effectively overcome perceived advantages in sheer numbers and fighting spirit. Kawaguchi's personal fate served as a stark illustration of the broader consequences of this tactical disaster. The general, who had previously enjoyed a well-deserved reputation as one of Japan's most capable and experienced field commanders, found his distinguished career effectively ended by the humiliating failure on Guadalcanal. His superiors in Tokyo viewed the devastating defeat as irrefutable evidence of inadequate leadership and poor tactical judgment, criticisms that conveniently ignored the fundamental problems with Japanese doctrine and strategic assessment that had ultimately made the disaster all but inevitable. The conflict's conclusion brought forth a cascade of medical revelations that further highlighted the extent of Japan's setback. American medical personnel, while tending to the injured prisoners of war, noticed that a significant number of enemy combatants were plagued by both malnutrition and tropical diseases. These ailments had substantially diminished their ability to effectively engage in combat. The Japanese logistical framework, already strained to its breaking point due to extended supply routes and relentless aerial assaults by American forces, had demonstrably failed in its mission to sustain the fighting units at their full operational capacity during these drawn-out campaigns fought within challenging and unforgiving environments. The American casualties, although deeply regrettable for the families and military units involved, nonetheless reflected an overwhelmingly positive exchange rate, thereby justifying the tactical decisions that had been implemented throughout the course of the engagement. The 43 Marines who perished, along with the 97 who sustained injuries, had managed to inflict casualties on the Japanese forces at a rate exceeding 20-1. This ratio underscored not only the inherent defensive strengths of the ridge itself, but also the enhanced effectiveness of American weaponry and strategic maneuvers. The broader political implications of this triumph extended far beyond mere military considerations, significantly influencing both American morale and the strategic calculations of the Japanese throughout the Pacific theater. The news of this successful defense resonated deeply back in the United States, arriving at a crucial moment when public sentiment was still wavering concerning America's prospects in the ongoing Pacific War. The Marine victory served as tangible proof that Japanese forces could indeed be vanquished through superior planning and professional execution, bolstering continued support for the massive military buildup that would ultimately prove to be the decisive factor. The ridge, which had borne witness to this pivotal shift in the dynamics of Pacific warfare, now stood silent under the afternoon sun, its slopes scarred with the remnants of battle, but no longer disputed by the opposing sides. For the 800 Marines who had steadfastly defended their position against overwhelming odds, this victory validated the entirety of their training in warfare, leadership, and the formidable power of disciplined soldiers, united by a cause they deeply understood and fervently supported. Stay with us and watch the end of the video. We would be grateful for your like and subscription, Leave a comment about where you are from and what you think about the video topic.